All right. This is episode 4 of Reinvent Hollywood, and today we're going to focus on the business. So if you tuned in before, you would have seen we started with the form, we moved to the artist, then to the audience. But today we talk about the financial side of things, how movies come together, how they reach audiences, how they actually can generate capital sometimes. We're going to focus on the changes, and we have a really great group. Our anchor today is Sharon Waxman, the CEO and editor of TheWrap, who has been chronicling these changes to the film business on a hourly, if not down to the second basis. Thanks very much for joining us, Sharon.
Pleasure.
Also on the media side, I'm very thrilled to have one of the hosts of my favorite podcast on the media, Bob Garfield, somebody who also has been chronicling the changes, not just across film, but media in general.
Hey, Ted, sorry to interrupt you, but we're having some issues with your microphone, so I just wanted to get this right before you continue on.
Okay.
A quick solution is actually just to click on the settings thing up in the top and select from the Logitech microphone to the internal microphone on your laptop.
Okay, hopefully that's better.
Great. Go
All
ahead.
sound good?
Yeah, that's much better.
So I was just saying, we're also joined by Bob Garfield, the host of On the Media, the greatest podcast in the history of the universe. Also author of The Chaos Theory and the new book, Can't Buy Me Like. Bob's also a columnist for MediaPost, has I believe, a bi-weekly column in The Guardian, and knows his space and the changes throughout the whole media landscape quite well. Bob, thanks for joining.
My pleasure, Ted. I have to say I'm a little disappointed. I really kind of liked that exorcist voice you were throwing at us.
Yes, sometimes, Satan does come out of me, I have to admit. So also on this, we have none other than the leading sales agent on the planet, Glen Basner, the founder and CEO of FilmNation. Glen is instrumental in bringing us, really, I think perhaps definitely my top 3 favorite films of the last year, Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin. So thank you for making that movie happen, Glen. Also in the theaters now is David Michôd's The Rover, which Lionsgate and Roadside Attractions is distributing. And coming soon, Terrence Malick's Night of Cups. Yes, Night of Cups. So Glen, prior to founding FilmNation, was the president for the international side of the Weinstein Companies. Also, vice exec EVP at Focus Features International. Came out of the legendary film company Good Machine. I know where he got his start, selling sweaters in factories in Hong Kong. Glen, thanks for being here. I think we had you muted. Franklin Leonard, the founder of the transformative Blacklist, which is, I think, had no less, Blacklist projects have now received no less than 175 Academy Award nominations. The Blacklist, for those of you that haven't checked it out, has been instrumental in surfacing projects that might have otherwise gone unnoticed and bringing them to the attention of the industry and making them happen. Consequently, if you look up any list that has anything from 35 under 35 or 40 innovators in the film world or anything like that, you no doubt will see Franklin's mug. right there. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, even if I'm rapidly aging out of all of that stuff.
Yeah, they don't do those 50 over 50 lists. I have to tell you, I haven't seen one of those things. Sanjay Sharma is also with us, one of the first folks at the now legendary, and I can never say it correctly, Machinima online platform. Generally an expert in everything digital, the changing way that online content is now merging with film and television to really represent what is Hollywood. Sanjay, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Last but not least, my good friend and former cohort in arms, the producer Mary Jane Skalski. Amongst other things, Mary Jane is a senior advisor for Game Changer, the new funding operation backing women directors feature films. But perhaps most notable to the audience, Mary Jane's had a long producing collaboration with Tom McCarthy, starting with The Station Agent, and soon we'll be able to see, I guess, your fourth collaboration, The Cobbler, starring none other than Adam Sandler. So I look forward to that. Thanks for joining us, Mary Jane. So that's our team today. I think to start things off, I'd like for us to try to give shape to what the film biz is now. How are things changing? What are the observations we have that might differ from either the public's perception or what others in the industry see? And Sharon, perhaps you could share some of your observations to start.
Sure. As you say, we chronicle this minute by minute, and a lot of what we're trying to do is help the film industry figure out how you evolve into business models that'll make sense. But and Ted, you've been a huge part of that conversation since we started 5.5 years ago. Can you hear me? Okay.
I hear you great.
Yes?
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I mean, what's going on right now? I mean, let's just even take a look at what's going on at the summer, which of course is the peak period for movie going. It's when most of the box office, along with Christmas, when those dollars come in. So we're seeing it's a very, very weak box office right now at the summer. It's down, I don't know, 15% from last year. There's a few anomaly reasons why. There's no big Iron Man, and Paul Walker died, so Fast and Furious didn't come out. But notably also for the kinds of films that we all, I think, cherish and hold dear to our hearts are the character-driven dramas and the kinds of sort of, more lasting, I would say, kind of filmmaker, more meaningful kind of filmmaking. And that score, it's also not a great summer. We've not had a breakout so far in the indie sector like Mud last summer, for example. I was thinking this movie, Begin Again, the John Carney movie that the Weinstein Company picked up in Toronto, was like a sensation in Toronto. It was called before Can a Song Save Your Life with Keira Knightley. It's really well done. It's still it's chugging along at the box office, but it's not doing big business. And there's a number of movies like that. Summer's not over. Something can come out of the woodwork and surprise us. But what we are always hoping for is to see something that's like, I gotta see that, and that draws more people to the theater. So right now we're looking at a landscape which is driven, as we now know, by these huge blockbuster, sci-fi, apocalyptic, CG vehicles that are generally franchises, the Marvel, the DC Comics, all of those, and then nothing in the middle anymore, and then these very small movies that are struggling to make their money back and will have to do it probably on VOD and on all these myriad other platforms. But you guys are probably in a better position to tell me how long that tail is before the filmmaker sees some money. So it's overall, I'd say, kind of destabilized, fractured, and then that big hole in the middle is still there, and no, we haven't figured out how to make those mid-size dramas anymore that we used to love to go to see at the movie theater.
I think that polarization, you know, of the tent poles on one hand and the, you know, micro budget amateurs on the other, you know, is very accurate. But in some ways, I got, you know, tremendous hope, you know, in terms of how outside financing can start to shift things. That, you know, my favorite movie so far this summer is Snowpiercer. There was a whole chain. I woke up to a chain of emails from my staff, you know, who have seen the movie and how excited they are about it. That's just, it's political, it's got thrills, and that it comes from an outside finance source. You know, that it was the international CJ Entertainment that really made that movie happen, a Korean company, not a American company. Glen, I was wondering if you could address both that. You know, it seems that one of the other big changes afoot is how the international box office, you know, now accounts for so much of what movies get made, what gets financed, what gets into the theaters. And it's folks like you and your team, the other sales agents out there, who construct these things and put things together. You know, I know that the battle to get Jonathan Glazer's film Under the Skin was a long and arduous task to reach this, but it's also one of the most innovative films of recent times. Can you address a little bit about like how that shift to no longer being just a domestic product, but something that really depends on partners throughout the world to get these movies made, how that's affecting what films get green light and what films reach us in the theaters?
Yeah, I think that traditionally there's always been groupings of people that partner together around the world to get movies made. I think one of the big fundamental differences is that as the territorial international box office continues to grow, the amount of resources a Korean filmmaker may have at their disposal to make a movie can also continue to grow. We're also seeing, you know, in many countries, different types of, whether it's rebates or whether it's soft money, government money, that will also continue to enhance the budget. So when you talk about a film like Snowpiercer, the amount of money they could afford to invest from Korea alone was astronomical relative to the budget of the movie, and that's what enabled the filmmaker like that to go make a movie of that scale, which added to the experience of the movie. With Under the Skin, you know, if it wasn't for Film 4 and the Scottish Film Council, I don't know that you could have ever made the economics of that make sense. And they're getting different types of value out of that by being a British film. I don't want to say English because Scotland was involved. And that's something that we continue to look to say, well, we're not just really making American movies, we're making movies from all over the world. So how can we continue to take advantage of whether it's local territory growth or creative financial ways to give filmmakers the tools they need to make the films as special as we'd like them to be?
It's almost as if you're saying that each country is focusing a little bit on themselves, and as a result have new entry into the domestic market to some degree. Is that?
Absolutely, where you're seeing local films generate outsized returns in their individual countries. One of the topics that I'm hoping will come up today is, well, what about the American indie film business? But this is one of the biggest problems that we have, is that whether it's in Korea or Japan, where local films have continued to grow as a percentage of the box office in the last 5 years, they're making their own independent films. They're telling their own stories that their local audiences are relating to. And then it's one of the challenges for a company like ours is how do we identify those type of movies that can then translate around the world. And that's one of the most, frankly, exciting components of the job is we can be working on an American movie, a Chinese movie, a Spanish movie, and a British movie all at the same time.
But I think that captures it kind of like, for me, the big change that we're having is, look, I don't know if this statistic is accurate. It goes further back. I think I actually first used it when on one of your panels, Sharon, when I was on it with Chris Himes a while back. He used the figure that there were 50,000 films generated on a global basis per year. 50,000 films, and the U.S. market is generally handles between 500 and 600 theatrical titles a year. Meanwhile, I go to the theaters, and it might be the question of the movies I see, but I see a lot of folks who are 40 years and up. Rarely do I, the movies I see, do I see movies that address millennials. How is the industry adapting to this change of abundance? How do all of these new creators, having had the barriers to entry dropped, the barriers to distribution heavily altered, how do they get discovered? And how do we start to recognize that it is not just an American Hollywood business, but something where we now have the ability to target different audiences? I was listening to on the media, I think it was on Saturday, Bob, and I liked the stat of the new show that we have 55 million Latinos in America, or Spanish speakers. Like we're part of Latin America, here. Yet other than the Fast and the Furious, we don't have a targeted franchise, to that audience. How are we going to start to? What will it look like to adapt to this world of abundance? What will it look like to start to target these audiences? Where can we learn from mistakes in other fields?
Well, can I take a shot at that?
Please.
Okay, the first thing I want to say is it's a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't know shit about shit. I'm not Sharon Waxman. I do not spend every day obsessively tracking the ebb and flow of the business. I don't know anyone in Hollywood. I haven't seen film screened in a theater, I think, since the Clinton administration, which is part of the problem. But because I do make a living speaking authoritatively about things I don't necessarily understand, I have some thoughts. And there's two questions. There's what happens to Hollywood at the studios and what happens to the indie world. Hollywood has actually kind of licked the problem. What Hollywood needs is what the world doesn't need, but what Hollywood needs is to clone Michael Bay. Now, that may be a kind of a hard idea to get your head around, having more than one of that man, but nonetheless, the way Hollywood has adapted is to make sure that there are barriers of entry, that there is scarcity. You can make a movie with an iPhone for about $150, but you can't make Spider-Man 11 with an iPhone. And they have ensured their place in the market, especially internationally, with the kind of big budget spectaculars that puts them in competition with nobody else but other Hollywood studios. So that's how they see the way forward, and it may be sustainable, it may not be. On the indie side, what we all need to make that economy work, I think, is magic beans. Because the economics of a digital world just militate to the detriment of films and all other media. It has screwed up the music business, probably irretrievably, certainly in the newspaper business, is circling the drain. Magazines, all other media that were built on the basis of vast barriers of entry and scarcity have been democratized into economic oblivion, and there's no real solution. I mean, there's things you can do at the margins, almost none of which the movie industry is doing, like changing the notion of discovery and how to market a film, and to think about what kind of films you want to make and what kind of audiences you want to target. But fundamentally, this is a very, very depressing reality that we are in a digital age. The costs of production have come down, but the costs of marketing have soared, and the distribution, you are now dealing with a glut, and therefore discovery is diminished by an order of magnitude, and your revenues have followed accordingly. It is a very, very pessimistic story I have to tell, and yet, I am just flabbergasted by how poorly the industry as a whole has adapted. How the decisions are made to greenlight films that should never be greenlighted. The just adding to a glut. The decision to the kinds of forsaking of any thought of marketing. Everything. The concentration is entirely on getting financing and getting a film shot, as if that ended the process. Hardly any thought, it seems to me, given to what happens after you have a film in the can. And I don't think getting a better sales agent is the secret in 2014. So it's a pretty scary landscape, I would say, all in all.
Well, I would also agree that it's the marketing costs are so tremendous. It always feels to me like that's the bigger barrier. I feel, at least just in my own world, in the last few years, there is a lot of money out there. There's a lot of production money. Like I always keep these lists, and it used to always be like maybe I'd come up with 1 or 2 new names a week of someone to kind of explore, pursue, or look at as a potential film financier. Now it's like every day there's more names or more possible places to kind of look for financing, and I find that the real barrier is really how you're getting a film out there, because while there's this tremendous downward pressure on production budgets, I find like once the film has a distributor, that there isn't that same pressure on those budgets, and then it just tips the scale of how much money it takes to get money back into the filmmaker's pocket and back into the investors, which then, influences me right at square one in trying to get films financed. That it's that side of it that I can't get that amount smaller, while my own production budgets are being squished smaller.
I often think the advice, if I was starting out today, would be I wouldn't be a filmmaker. I'd be making content for online. Sanjay, I think you've had a nice front row seat seeing, what can be done there and the new opportunities it provides. Is it can online distribution and content save the film biz?
Yeah, I certainly think it can and will. And what we've seen happen that's so exciting is this fusion of these worlds. 10 years ago we were talking about convergence, and now with the proliferation of video-enabled devices and the collision of video, the social web, and the mobile web, which somebody on the chat asked about, and we'll talk about in a second, you're seeing a transformation that is making it possible for content to reach audiences, content and filmmakers to build audiences and be discovered in ways outside of the traditional studio system, to prove concepts, to engage audiences, to test concepts before sort of taking them out. The folks that have already talked have stirred up a lot of thought. So what I thought I would do is maybe cover off a couple of topics that other folks have touched on that I think are pretty fascinating. So you started, Ted, talking about Snowpiercer, which I agree is just a phenomenal movie. The globalization of the industry and of content and content finding talent and then finding an audience is supremely interesting. I think you've got a film made by a Korean director based on a French graphic novel. financed largely by CJ Entertainment, for an audience that, in Asia, certainly, in the Far East and in India, huge theater-going audiences still, and in the U.S., I think, minorities make up a significant amount of the active theater-going audience. Finding and breaking through when you had an amazing movie, I thought, Edge of Tomorrow, big budget studio movie. I first read that script from The Blacklist, actually. Franklin, thank you for that. I thought the script was amazing. I think, you'll remember better than I, but I think that was also based on a graphic novel. So you have this major studio production with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, and then you have this little film directed by a guy that directed The Host, a Korean director, both seeing very different outcomes. I think Snowpiercer's already made over $80 million, and the budget was probably $30 or $40 million. And the weekend Edge of Tomorrow opened. This little movie called The Fault in Our Stars opened, right, and made nearly $50 million at the box office on a $10 or $15 million production budget. And what that movie had going for it was it had a huge audience already built, and much of that audience, or at least some of it, was built on this online video platform called YouTube, which is a giant juggernaut, obviously, that everyone now knows about. And so that's, I think, the mixing of these worlds, the lack of preciousness around content on a platform like YouTube is making it possible for content creators to start experimenting a little bit more again, to start testing ideas and testing characters, testing scenes, and building on those, finding what works for them, then using social media to get an audience. The company A24 is doing a fantastic job of this. Nicole, and you talked about the rising cost of marketing, and I think what A24 is doing is very, very interesting. They spend I don't think they spend any money on traditional television advertising for their movies, and a lot of the movies we've talked about today are all distributed by A24 from. We didn't talk about Locke, but The Rover, I think, was an A24 movie. Under the Skin. And we didn't talk about Spring Break.
Glen has them in his pocket.
What's that?
And that's because Glen's got him in his pocket.
Exactly. Once you get him to back your movie, then you're basically done. So.
Sanjay, I wasn't going to mention this till later, but what you just said triggered a thought, and that is that this process of using your online tools to test scenes, test ideas, test this, that, and the other thing. It could be so fundamental to discovery and marketing and building up excitement for a film, because the more public you are with people who you let behind the velvet rope for any reason, the more you tap into their social networks as they get excited about a project, maybe even 2 years before it's released. And your social media so gives you the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. And
yeah, absolutely.
And yet, it's a huge opportunity that I just think is widely squandered by people who just don't want to have the reveal until the red carpet is laid out.
Well, change is slow, but I think we've seen it. Franklin, you've been instrumental in changing what projects get surfaced and ultimately thus get made.
Yeah, and I wanted to actually build on what was said. Really, the last two comments. I think, in a very small way, what the Blacklist has always done is sort of let people, both folks working within the industry who may not be all the way behind the velvet rope, but also the public to some extent, let people in on, hey, here are some things that maybe on their face are not commercial, but somebody's liking them, and maybe you should pay attention to them too. And by sort of demonstrating pre-existing interest from some people, we're creating more interest that eventually leads the right person to read the script that then maybe gets involved in it, or create a wellspring of interest, within the public. I don't want to overstate our role, at least in terms of the public-facing aspect of it. But I do want to get back to what Sanjay talked about a little bit with regard to media, and I really feel like it's been. I think it's funny to me that the industry is just catching on to the extent to which the social media and talent developing audiences, has been helpful, because it's been happening in minority communities for years now. For people were shocked by the opening of Fast and Furious 4 But anybody who'd been paying attention to Vin Diesel on social media, particularly on Facebook, wasn't all that surprised. And I think it was the combination of that being a bit of a blind spot for the industry, but also the Latino, Black, and Asian audiences being a blind spot as well. And I think you see it a lot with, and my favorite example of this recently is Kevin Hart. You have the industry trades covering him as an overnight success story, but he's been on Twitter and Facebook and Vine and Instagram and pretty much anywhere where anyone will listen to him, he's been building an audience. And so when his movies came out, whether it be Think Like a Man or Ride Along or whatever it is, came out and far, far exceeded the industry's expectations, it wasn't because it was a surprise to anybody who'd been paying attention. It was because the industry's expectations were deeply, deeply flawed. And I think we're seeing that time and time again with films targeted at audiences that are not particularly well represented in Hollywood proper. And by that I mean pretty much anyone who's not a young white man.
But I wonder, like I had great hopes that, the number of followers, the deeper engagement that people had around social media would start to transform what movies get made. We've certainly seen the rise of YouTube stars and folks, from that world actually becoming, bankable, commodities, at least in the online world of getting shows funded up front, but I wanted just in the metrics of evaluating things, Glen, in particular, like, do you get into those numbers nowadays? When we try to ascertain the qualifying economic indicators of a film's success, do you look at the social media? When I look at the challenge that we have facing us, it goes back, 20 years ago, I think we actually had predictable revenues. But now, what's predictable? Could they have predicted all of Kevin Hart's success by following his Twitter feed? Is it changing what films that you'll get involved with, Glen? And how also be kind of curious to hear, Sanjay on your side and Sharon where else you've heard it. Is social media transforming the nature of what movies can be made? 20 years ago, I think we actually had predictable revenue. Now, what's predictable? That was weird.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, Ted, I just want to say, part of I think the problem is the way in which we can engage. With part of the problem I find is that if I want to engage with an author, I can follow the author and then I can get the book. But I can't with a film.
Yeah, transforming the nature of what movies. 20 years ago, I think we actually had.
This is a good quote, Ted. Wants to just keep putting it out there. But then I find, with a movie, not everybody wants to engage in the same way, but they may want to see the movie. But then how they can do that, you can't really, it's not tangible. Somebody maybe can follow it and enjoy the behind-the-scenes experience, but if they want to watch the movie, it's still a long way away. And then how they'll get to do it in their own community is something that they have no control over. I have a movie out right now that's doing Ultra VOD, which is Very Good Girls, and it's very interesting to see how when the movie's put out there, the people who want to see it will gravitate towards it and see it at a premium, even though in 2 weeks it might be in a theater near them or whatever it is. And I think that that's still part of the problem in trying to take what is exciting to people about social media and being engaged and turning it into feature films that take a year or 2 years to get out, and then you still can't control how that person's going to actually be able to see that movie. So I think it's a barrier to it.
I think a good example this summer was The Fault in Our Stars. They took, granted this was a property that had a passionate following as a book, but they did an absolutely brilliant job at Fox at taking social media and using it to take a mid-sized movie and to give it a blockbuster opening weekend. Every single person who cared at all about that book and who were interested in Shailene Woodley were aware of that movie the weekend it opened. And it kind of, I don't think that it was going to have the kind of legs at the box office as a blockbuster movie, because it's not really what we used to call a four-quadrant movie. It's really for young women, and it's something that they're super passionate about. But in that case, they were really smart about targeting that audience over social media, whether that was Instagram or Facebook and Twitter, and they were able to start a conversation among the fans, and that I think is very smart. And Fox was way out, because we did a whole social media campaign with them that we did. Like, we went out and did video conversations with people and did a poll. And we did that because Fox was way out ahead of it and wanted to do different kinds of little grow pockets. Our audience obviously is not young millennial girls, but they wanted to broaden the message of the audience, and it really worked. And I think that the more, I see it all the time. I mean, Glen, I'd be curious to hear from you, but I hear it from all the time from friends who are producers, when they're talking about casting, when they're talking about putting together budgets for movies. They are looking absolutely at the Twitter followings, the Facebook pages of the actors who are in these movies, and they're thinking from the get-go how they are going to use social media to promote the movie. What I think social media is not doing is it hasn't demonstrably shown that it can actually drive box office. But I think in general, about raising awareness and getting people excited about a movie, I think, yes, it's become critical.
I want to disagree a little bit on the question of whether social media can drive box office, because I think it's a question of what type of social media drives box office. Volume, the number of followers it matters, I guess, to some extent, but I think it really is the depth of the relationship that the talent has with their audience. And I think that's really where Kevin Hart, for example, among others, distinguishes himself. There's a dialogue happening. It's not just a sort of monodirectional sort of feed of information. Folks who are Kevin Hart fans feel like they are interacting with Kevin Hart online, even if he does have, literally millions of followers on Twitter. And people have a conversation around him. I mean, this is an analogy I haven't fully developed, but I think that in many ways politics and the film industry have a lot to learn from each other. The Obama campaign, I think, in 2008, and to a slightly lesser extent in 2012, did a very good job not only, generating a database of people who were interested, but maintaining an ongoing dialogue and creating a community around this idea that on the day of the election, all of us are going to go vote. And I think that in the same way, the film industry is faced with this problem of, you can let people behind the curtain to some extent, but at the end of the day, what you need them to do is leave their house on opening weekend, pay their money, and go see the film, which is not all that different from actually going to the ballot box, no matter how many bumper stickers or how many times you tweet about a candidate. And for the most part, we've seen candidates try to make a play in social media, whether they be local or gubernatorial candidates, and not really have success. And I think that really the difference between something like Obama and The Fault in Our Stars or any Kevin Hart film is the depth of social media penetration and connection, not necessarily just the volume. And I think that's really what I can't think of a film that has a large depth of audience talking about it on social media that hasn't then been able to translate that into some significant box office.
It's not just about counting up the Twitter followers of talent either. Communities coalesce around the damnedest things, and one of the things it can coalesce around is a project, a film, and the opportunity to build a following and a community around an ongoing project. The power of which later to unleash when it comes time to open the film has not really been much experimented with, and it's kind of astonishing to me. The film can be the personality, and the issues explored in the film can help create parallel communities. Social media is not like a TV campaign where you have to pick one theme line and a couple of trailer images and just constantly repeat them. No, there you can slice and dice the universe in many ways around various aspects of an ongoing film project, and really have a lot of reach before you ever have a film in the can. And I'll be very happy to see that kind of understanding represented in future marketing efforts at every stage of a production.
Yeah, that's it. To add on to that, Bob, what you and Franklin were saying, I think is exactly right. There is the social footprint of talent, or the creators, or the actors in the content, but there's actually the social footprint of the project itself and maybe the subject matter of the project. So to me, when you mentioned community around a project, I thought of the show Community, right, which is known for, it was canceled on TV and then picked up, I think, by Hulu recently. And I've talked to a lot of TV studio executives and network buyers, and to the folks at Twitter who are doing massive amounts of kind of big data crunching around conversations just that are happening around the show itself, not necessarily around one of the actors or one of the writers. And so, Community's had a lot of stuff written about just the massive social footprint of the show itself and the core loyal following. And this is sort of speaking to the increased fragmentation that's happened from broadcast television to cable television, and now in a world where content is increasingly, and I believe will only be delivered through internet protocol or mobile transmission means, and not through terrestrial television the way we've seen it before. And so the ability to find maybe smaller audiences, but much more loyal, engaged, and passionate audiences will become critical. So when you look at a TV show like Community, or when you look at a lot of shows that we developed for the web in my days at Machinima, we looked at what is happening on YouTube, what content are audiences engaging in. We did a series with Warner Brothers based on the game Mortal Kombat. We looked and scanned the YouTube universe and applied kind of data crunching to look at how popular is Mortal Kombat on YouTube. Are people posting a lot of videos about that game? Is it a popular game in the world of YouTube? If so, we know that may be a better fit for this audience and this platform because the IP is alive and already proven there, even though that IP had not really been that present in the feature film world. The feature film series had kind of been put to sleep and were being resurrected. So the social footprint of the concept, the subject matter, and the show, the project itself, is as important, if not maybe more important, than the personalities themselves.
I'd in for a second, just tying into a lot of things that people had said. In many ways, we're a pretty traditional feature film company. We've built all of our films for a theatrical release, and we've gone about finding material in pretty conventional ways. But a few years ago, we did something different that's starting to actually happen, which is we noticed a short film called What's in the Box that was a hit in early YouTube terms, and we had seen it, we had liked it, and we met the filmmaker, and we've been developing the feature film version of that movie. So we are looking at it as IP. So whether it's discovering it on YouTube or anywhere else, there is a built-in base because many millions of people have watched that short film, and now it's our job to make a successful version of it, a feature film version of it, and then tap into that audience. One of the interesting things about the movie is that it's the first movie that we're going into production on completely agnostic in terms of I don't really necessarily have a preferred way of screening this movie for people around the world. Maybe it'll be theatrical, maybe it'll be on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere else. But it was born in a different way, and so our outlook on distribution is looked at in a completely different way. And I don't know where that will lead us. And a big question that we are starting to explore is how do we take advantage and market that movie to the people who like the short at a very early period. But I think that people are starting to look at different things that are coming off, whether it's the web or anywhere else, as intellectual property, and then it's whether or not we believe we can tell good long-form storytelling from that material, and then how to reach the audience.
You know, it occurs to me that, you know, a lot of this is how the technology has allowed new forms of currency to take hold. You know, you have a film or a script that, you know, makes it to the top 5 of the blacklist. You basically just got the star that gets your movie greenlit. If you are a online personality with millions of subscribers, you are going to get a show that's launched. If you are Kevin Hart or another comic who actually engages deeply with your audience, you will start to see that change in box office dollars. But meanwhile, we're doing everything still back-asswards, right? We still have an industry that actually thinks it makes a product that it is strong enough to gather people around, to say, we are going to have you alter your behavior and come to us, come to see where this film is. Instead of saying, I'm going to go out there and search all of the folks who are engaged in this activity, right? I read somewhere, and we can certainly address this, Sanjay, that 60% or something of all online content is people watching people play video games. I have no idea if that sort of thing. But like, here was a huge need. People loved to do it. And Machinima came along and addressed it, and we were missing that audience for years. We still don't have an industry that says, I'm going to deliver my work to where the community is always already gathered. We still don't have an industry that has set up a metric that says, this will allow me to get the film greenlit because I recognize there's a community that's here. We're still surprised by things like Fast and Furious 4. It feels like when are we going to wake up and understand we won't have to spend so much in marketing if we actually just start to take advantage of this unique thing called the internet that allows us to connect people and content together and measure it.
I mean, I would just like to respond to that too, Ted, just reinforcing what you said. I think that's been the incredible power that Netflix has brought to the table in its programming choices, is that it is using its data and its reader base, its subscriber base, to make decisions about what kinds of content it wants to make. That is, I think, the missing piece that you're talking about here. What's always been amazing to me is that the studios have, I mean, still not figured out, as you say, how to connect directly to their consumers, to the ticket buyers. So all of the information, which, by the way, the movie theaters aren't processing any better. They're not leveraging that data any better. But you'd think that the movie studios would be sophisticated enough to figure out how to bypass the theaters and understand who is going to the movies and dig into that data. I thought that was why Warner Brothers was buying Flickster, and I thought that was what Fandango was supposed to be about, was buying these 20 million subscribers or whatever it is, to be able to understand better who's going to the movies and why and how often and how do you get them to go more. So that still is an opportunity that has not really been exploited properly. I agree.
No, you said it. Like I just had one of the studios, essentially VC arms, biz dev arms, come and talk to me, about discovery apps, and there's a whole slew of them out in the marketplace. Saying that with the collapse of the video stores, they've realized that they've lost their biggest B2C interface. And that's how it was phrased, right? That they're not in direct relationship with consumers anymore. And they look at things like what Warner, precisely the example was used because it wasn't Warner's, what Warner's did with Flickster, as perhaps these apps can put them directly in contact with them. But what they were saying was, we've lost contact with our audience. We don't know who our audience is. like, oh my God, you know,
Well,
it's like.
I mean, that's a good question. I'd love to hear what other people think or know about this, although we don't have studio executives on this panel. But, like, why didn't Flickster and why didn't the Fandango purchases over at Comcast yield that kind of learnings? It just seems to me obvious, and the fact that it's not been done means there is a huge opportunity for some technology company to figure that out. It could be, you know, a branch off of Netflix, frankly, if they were interested in doing that. I have had more young, smart entrepreneurs come into TheWrap and show us what they were building with an eye to doing exactly that. Research companies, that really the research was a Trojan horse to figure out exactly who the movie-going audience is, and to sell that back to the studios, because the studios were not gathering that data themselves.
My limited experience with studio executives is that they're actually hostile to the idea, and this is kind of confounding, that they have an audience per se. They take it as an article of faith that studios don't have audiences, only films have audiences, and that they're simply spinning their wheels to try to collect and scrutinize the kind of data you're talking about, because they're only concerned about how a particular film attracts an audience or doesn't. And they just simply don't believe that looking at the larger view about what the studio's aggregate audience, how it behaves, really matters to them. They think their brand names of Paramount and MGM and Warner don't really matter that much, which, you know, has some truth to it. I don't know anybody who says, hey, have you seen the new Warner picture? But there's no reason that must still be true. These are brands with tremendous value that, in my view, has been underexploited as well. So they could kind of kill two birds with one stone by thinking about branding themselves as studios and also paying a whole lot more attention to how a Warner audience behaves.
I think Bob is absolutely right here. And speaking as a former studio executive at Universal, that was my experience. You know, executives and the studios are sort of developing projects on a project-by-project basis with no thought whatsoever to the idea of the studio's audience writ large. I think there might be one exception to this, and I'm fascinated by what Disney's doing with their sub-brands. I think, you know, when you have Marvel, you can say, hey, there's a Marvel movie coming out on Friday, and that will be enough to motivate people to go to the audience. And the same is true with Pixar, and I think we'll see the same thing with Lucasfilm. But beyond that, I can't think of the last time someone outside of the industry was even aware that a film was a Paramount film or a Universal film, and that altered their decision about what film to go see on a Friday or Saturday night. And I think it's really fascinating. I think A24, you know, I think Sanjay, you mentioned this earlier, is doing a really good job on the indie side of saying, this is who our identity is as a company, and you can look to us for a curated set of films that are consistent with this identity, whether it be the identity we project on our Twitter feed or Instagram. And I think that is going to enable them in the long run to capture audiences for film that might not otherwise be interested in it, just because they're like, well, I like who these people are, I know who A24 is, they have this film that I don't know very much about, but I should probably do a little bit more research and consider going to see it because they're telling me that I should go see it. But you don't get that right now with any of the other major studios, again, with the possible exception of Disney.
I think Miramax once had that, and it was really...
I agree, absolutely. I mean, and the Weinstein Company may now as well, actually.
Well, I would also argue that Focus Features got pretty damn close to it under, you know, Seamus's, you know, hand, and then all of a sudden, 180 degrees, you know, change. You know, as opposed to saying, you know, is there a alternative way that we could launch a genre strand, you know, while keeping the prestige quality brand alive, you know?
Well, Focus could easily have seen Focus becoming Fandor, right? I think that's the point. Is there are these brands that can emerge that create a true direct-to-consumer relationship, especially over the top or online. And traditional studios are not used to actually owning their audience. They're used to putting pictures in theaters, and exhibitors are the ones who actually own the audience and sell tickets. And so that chain has never really been connected, and they're very large companies with different organizations that do different things, and so newer, scrappier companies, I think, are able to connect these dots more aggressively. Sharon, you mentioned Netflix. That's exactly right. They own their user. Every user is a subscriber to Netflix. I have young kids, and when they now go to watch TV, they don't, they look at the TV as you may as well have a microwave in the corner of the living room. They just think of it as like a big appliance, right? They grab the iPad, they thumb through it, they find Netflix, they think of Netflix as a brand they recognize, and they go find content directly, right? And the genius of Netflix is whatever they're watching, they're aggressively mining that behavior and seeing what they watch, how long they watch it, what leads them from this content to that content, so they can make recommendations that enable discovery and just better lifting up of the right content to the right user. And traditional studios have just never thought that way or lived in a world where that was even possible, right?
But here's the dichotomy, right? Here's the polarization of the times that we're living in, right? We mentioned Marvel. We mentioned the Disney focus on the sub-brands. What Marvel and DC did in the golden era, even of the 80s comic book, was that they had this inexpensive way to do what the internet now does, what you were referring to, Sanjay, right? To test characters. It was a character generator. They built out the Marvel universe, the DC universe. They launched tons of these things and could see how the audience responded. We could do that. It is being done online right now. The ability to create lasting properties that apply to the niche audience is happening. However, simultaneously, the hope that I had that the internet would create all of these niche communities, all of these niche properties, tons of Kevin Harts and Fault of Our Stars, we kind of see the opposite, right? We actually see that the winner takes all formula of blockbusters, of tentpoles, of pumping tons and tons of money into a title wins, right? And we don't have many tales of the under the radar true successes. Fault of Our Stars is not under the radar. Kevin Hart is not under the radar. We don't have these things popping up. Instead, even though we have the ability to generate new characters, to test them out there, it is the huge corporately funded movies that are pushing everything out, and can a little guy ever come up and really establish a foothold?
Are you talking about like a film version of Macklemore? Is that the model that you're... I'm just curious, how are you defining success and sort of coming in under the radar and being successful? I think some of that is just an issue of, can somebody under the radar who has made a film, no matter how popular they are, get access to 2,000 theaters to some extent? I mean, on some level, you're going to be supported by corporate forces or some significant corporate forces.
Well, it wasn't always that way, right? When I started in the film business, when Mary Jane and Glen, worked at Good Machine, we only needed to have something, basically feel like it would recoup 125% of its budget. We now have this connected world. We have this, VOD emerging technology, yet all we're able to sell, Glen's business is still the tent poles of the art house world. Filmmakers can't sustain themselves. That would be success, I think. Like, Glen, do you see a world where I wonder, like, will the multi-territory, short-term, single-platform licenses become a viable business, over the all media, single territory, long-term licenses? Can something start to work that actually allows, underdogs, non-winner takes all, corporate-backed media to actually get that foothold?
I think so. But but I think it's even less specific than that. And I think the whole conceit of, well, we have to get into the movie theater, I don't know why that has anything to do with success. And I say that's my entire business to this point. But going back to the movie that we're making, I don't know that going to the movie theater is the most successful way for us, purely on a financial level, to monetize that content. And I think that what we'll see is people are out there, whether it's social media or creating content for the web, they can directly themselves, without companies like FilmNation or without studios, could establish relationships with consumers and continue to build it to them themselves without all the barriers of, I need someone because I need someone to book a theater and then collect the theater. And I think that you still may need iTunes to some extent, but the way that you're interacting with consumers it's here and now, and then it's just a question, well, to what level of it can you get, 5 million people to pay $3.99 to watch your feature film if we're talking about film, or to pay $1 if it's a short film, whatever it is. Can a filmmaker do that directly with consumers? And I'm hoping the answer will be yes, sometime in the near future.
In the near future, I don't even think theatrical is going to be the first window. It may be the third or fourth window. I think it's all on the verge of being irrelevant in discussing the future of distribution. We are already there where if you are not successful online, you will not be relevant. That is the way people will consume this content, and there is no reason to have this conversation unless you're thinking of that as the primary channel for reaching viewers.
For film?
At the moment, we're in this interregnum, but
I think that we have been predicting the demise of theatrical experience for at least 10 years, probably closer to 15 if you're a true futurist. It's not so simple as that. The problem is that there's this array of choices, and no single one is winning out, and no single one is losing. So it turns out that it takes a whole lot to kill something. What you do is wound it, and so everybody's kind of limping along. That's where we're at.
Well, I'm not suggesting that theatrical exhibition goes away. I just say that it ceases to be the first and main channel of distribution.
Well, you tell me if VOD, and I'd like to hear from everybody. I want to know, is VOD enough for a filmmaker to eat off of? I think that's what Ted was kind of saying. Can the filmmakers make a living? Because ultimately, if they can't, then we're not going to have the movies, right? I mean, Freddie Wong already has the model that Glen was just suggesting. Freddie Wong makes movies by himself, and he puts them out on the internet. Now now Hollywood's finally enticed him to make a movie, a feature film in the old system. But he had a very great, thriving business as a director, producer with his buddies, and resisted entering the Hollywood system. But the business models that exist now, it's scary to me. I can't tell.
Question, Sharon. The answer to your question is the vast majority of filmmakers, like the vast majority of authors and the vast majority of painters and other artists, will not be able to sustain a livelihood doing what they do. I mean, when 50,000 films are made a year, that is just an economic reality. And some will bubble to the top, and I think it's actually very bright. Social media and online streaming actually suggest a very bright future for those that coalesce an audience. But there's going to be, as has always been the history of commercial art, there will be very few winners and many, many losers. The only difference is that the losses will be spread among the filmmakers, unless the financial institutions that have absorbed the losses till now, and all the deliciously dumb money that has squandered its investments in film till now. But the good news is that there are ways, using a combination of streaming and social media techniques, to build significant, substantial, and profitable audiences for that small number of winners. And the mechanisms aren't really there now. I've got some thoughts, but of how they might be built out. But you know, there's not a reason to entirely slash your wrists. But nonetheless, as to your question, will filmmakers make money? No, the vast majority of them will not, and that is written in the stars.
One thing I was thinking about when I was preparing for the conversation was change doesn't usually come from within the industry, it comes outside the industry. And in terms of really where I look at it, I could care less if someone watches my movie in a movie theater, on their iPad, on their phone, as long as they watch it, they pay for it, and they're enjoying it, so they'll want to come back and see another movie. I remember when I was first starting out, Sex, Lies, and Videotape was a really influential movie, not just creatively, but in terms of the business. It almost made sense of the business of independent film. And if you think about all of the studio specialty divisions that followed from that movie, maybe it wasn't the start, but it's the start for me. I kind of think maybe it's about a filmmaker or a creator of some content that goes and does something special that then drives the business that then the industry starts to chase. So I'm kind of waiting in feature film world for what that film will be.
I think I agree with you, Glenn. I'd also, on the industry side, I'd be curious if a film that was a big tentpole film actually experimented with going out also on VOD at the same time, and to really see when you're dealing in such a large scale what those numbers really start to look like. And like if a film like Planet of the Apes was available on VOD close to the time that it was in theaters, what would really happen to its box office? I mean, I really believe for myself, you know, we see a movie when we want to see it the way we want to see it, and if it means waiting, we wait, and if it doesn't mean waiting, we'll sort of see it. Like, I'm not going to go to the theater simply to see something early if I'm not inclined to see it early, you know. So for me, a film that I wouldn't be inclined to go see in the theater that I might watch at home, I would do either way, and so it wouldn't cannibalize that box office. And I'd be curious on a bigger scale what it would look like. Because for me, in my world, the sooner my films are available digitally, the better they do across the board in their statements and for the financiers. And I think for it to take scale on a larger, kind of in a larger basis, we have to sort of see it happen with larger movies.
I think the difficulty there is that the exhibitors understandably pitch a fit.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it'll really happen, but I'd still like to see it.
I'm going to suggest, though, that we are going to see it with 50 Shades of Grey. I think there would be a massive missed opportunity if they failed to do it with 50 Shades of Grey. I think if ever there was a movie to simultaneously release in theaters and at home at a premium, that would be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the problems with the studios is that such a huge and important part of their revenue stream are their paid television deals, and doing stuff like that may actually negate the value of their paid TV deal, and that may hold them back from trying something like that. But Universal, because of Comcast and because of their direct relationship with consumers and their VOD, they certainly would be one of the studios that I think would be, you know, willing to try it earlier than others.
Right. Because I think what's so interesting is everything else in our lives, we're being trained to get things on demand or at least be able to order things immediately, except in the film business. You know, everything else, it's as soon as you want it, you can generally get it, or you can order it and it comes to you relatively quickly, except for film. So I'd be curious to see the film business look at that a little bit and come closer to it. Because it's how consumers are being trained.
You know, I ultimately think it's almost more transformative than just that where we are. That, you know, it really is a change, you know, to a business that recognizes the value of community in advance. So the business has to shift really towards that. You know, we talked about how iTunes is a good platform. What iTunes business was, you know, it was Apple, that by giving a luxury good, making it available to everybody, an aspirational good, that they were able to aggregate all of the audiences. You know, will we have another place where there is a destination marketplace to sell content? Can that be done? Or will it actually be that we'll go to different, you know, communities that are linked by similar values or typical demographics, and actually ask them to be our distributor. Like my problem as an independent is that everybody is fragmented. The audiences are everywhere. There's no easy way to reach them, and it doesn't justify the movies that I love. Can't justify a $10 million, $20 million, $50 million spend in the marketing. I can make them for pennies, but I can't reach the people. The business seems to start to be aggregate the audience. Audience becomes its own commodity. That we see that with Machinima. We see that with The Blacklist. Will we start to see it with the value? In some ways, Glen, your value is the deep relationships of trust and confidence that you have built amongst your audience, which is the territorial buyers. Is that really what the film business is going to become? Because Hollywood's business is about spending tons of money to reach those people. Did I stump you all?
Well, isn't it all upside down now? Isn't the whole distribution mechanism based on the convenience of the various media channels and not on consumer behavior? In almost all of their areas of enterprise now, the distribution, there are no more, the kingmakers are gone. The people, with the possible exception of Walmart or something, and Hollywood, who make decisions about what shall live and what shall die. Now we have the means and the consumer interest in sort of democratization of what is good. And instead of distribution decisions being imposed on us by studio executives and distributors and theatrical venues, when will the marketplace transform itself to match how people actually behave? Which is to say, discover stuff, pass it along, make consumer decisions, and then have it bubble up from there, letting the cream rise to the top. That's what the internet permits. It permits products to survive on the basis of their own quality. And how can the future of film not follow that kind of organization instead of the arbitrary dictated one that we're still clinging to?
Here.
I mean, one thing that's interesting to me is we have a very good story on the site that Lucas Shaw wrote yesterday that looks at the declining cost of comedies that are very successful at the box office. And one of the charts literally shows the cost of comedies from 2010, the average cost of a comedy, $74 million. 2014, the average cost of a comedy, $33.8 million. So the average cost of a comedy in Hollywood, and this is defined by the bigger, movies, not the straight to VOD, has to have a theatrical release, has gone down by more than half. And the comedies this summer have made money. We're talking about Neighbors, 22 Jump Street, The Other Woman, even Blended, which didn't, with the Adam Sandler movie, is going to make money. It's at $74 million. 2014, the average cost of... I'm hearing myself again. So, I wonder, why can't we find that kind of model for the dramas that we love as well? And because that really qualifies as a modestly budgeted, studio movie.
I'm curious what other people see as other opportunities and advancement for change. We do see the barriers to entry have dropped. We do see the cost of creation have dropped. We see it working comedies, which are, I think, an example of, they are probably the genre alongside horror that most benefits from word of mouth. Who doesn't want to feel that excitement, and it carries really quickly across social media. But this promise of the internet, of directing to niche audiences, of defining data, of being able to aggregate audience, the changes in other forms of technology, the rise of different communities, what opportunities does these create? You know, would we have predicted the blacklist, 10 years ago? Would we have predicted machinima 10 years, 15 years ago? I wouldn't have predicted it yesterday, frankly, on either front. You know, what are the other opportunities do we have?
Yeah, to me, what's exciting to me for kind of getting back to the origin of the conversation is for filmmakers or for content creators. I actually think the pie has gotten bigger, and this may not be right, and I need to probably think before I talk sometimes. But in film, at least, right, this was a very, very, very elite group of people that actually could be professional working filmmakers, right? I mean, I was a film major in college and worked on a lot of student films, and it was just clear that I was not talented enough to make it as a film. And I think online is it's not just the handful of repeat writers that just keep getting hired and hired and hired repeatedly by the studio system to write and rewrite. It's not just the go-to directors. There's very few directors like Steven Soderbergh that could do both Sex, Lies, and Videotape and do major studio movies. And they were it was kind of like a handful of winners, and that was it. And the rest were just starving artists. And I think, Bob, you mentioned this. That's kind of the state of commercial art generally. Whereas now with online, for content creators, whether you're a director or a visual effects artist, we see the ability to build audience directly outside of any other distribution channel, right? Directly from the content you create to finding an audience yourself and to building up your own personal kind of fan base and audience. That's extremely powerful for someone that's typically considered behind-the-scenes talent, like a director, right? Most people wouldn't recognize Steven Spielberg on the street. I mean, he may be not the right example. Most directors aren't like recognized people, right? Whereas we've seen now on YouTube folks like the Fine Brothers, visual effects folks like Corridor Digital, comedians like John Baker's Spoken Reasons, just building up audiences on their own simply by making content daily and weekly and it finding an audience. That's not really been possible in the history of filmmaking, I think, right? So I think that's what's really exciting to me for filmmakers, and many of those filmmakers on YouTube and now increasingly on Vine are actually making a living doing that. They may not be making Steven Spielberg money, but many of them make hundreds of thousands. Surprisingly, many of them make millions of dollars a year just from their content on YouTube. That's not a bad living for a young, aspiring filmmaker.
Here, here. And others, in terms of wanting to join in terms of what other opportunities we see for change and advancement?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Glen.
I'll just say one of the things that I'm excited about is in our little part of the industry, we're watching this huge migration to television. And I think that's partially a result of filmmakers feeling like they can create more creative content than they could in feature film, which was very different. But what I'm seeing is that whether it's film or whether it's television or anything else, that people are starting to consume content in greater volume than they had before there was the internet or from a year ago. And one studio head had told me an interesting thing that got me very excited about continuing to try and make all types of feature films, is that this year, for the first time, in real dollars, the increase in digital home entertainment, whether it's VOD, transactional VOD, SVOD, but the dollar increase is actually greater than the dollar decrease in terms of hard goods DVDs. And it's the first time that that's ever happened. And we're still so early in the stage of how people are consuming things that it leads me to believe that, I think Sanjay said this before, the pie really is about to get larger and larger, not far off in the future, but in the very near future. And that's something that is, I think, a real opportunity for all types of filmmakers.
That may be best news we've heard
kind
all
of like
year.
the perfect storm, kind of replicating, going back to the early days of Sundance and certainly the founding of Good Machine was, first you had this new technology, new platform, which was then videotaped, VHS, right? Because a problem in the legacy business, licensing of music, really limited which content could convert to that platform. Lots of titles were slowed because they weren't really cleared for all media. So you had new entities entering the world who were creating this content to get it up on the video shelves, right? Which allowed a whole new group of artists to emerge. With that changing of voices, greater diversity that occurred, you had the rise of the film festival, right, which was about bringing this content to the audiences. And what some of these festivals, Sundance in particular, emerged into was a marketplace where new buyers could have a benefit from Sundance's curatorial hand, see direct engagement with those audiences, and eventually start to acquire. Now, the market wasn't set, it wasn't mature, so at that point, things frequently were overbid. We can buy this for less than it would cost us to create, and we know it's right, which encouraged much more investment in the industry. So here we are, 2014, like this year we've seen Yahoo and AOL and every single online platform move into the original content business, mimicking what has been done previously in the television world, right? That we just saw Soderbergh, and David Gordon Green get greenlit by Amazon for a new pilot of serialized content. Yeah, where is that marketplace? The thing that I get, the big opportunity that I see and I imagine is that we will start to see independent production of serialized content by people of auteur status, and we will need to develop a marketplace for the acquisition of that content, of selling to new buyers. That's my hope. If I have to say one of the thing I would like to see happen in the next year, I think that would be a boon to ambitious and diverse culture on a global basis.
Well, Ted, you don't need a whole marketplace, because one platform, much as Netflix did, one platform can create the entire marketplace, or nearly entire one, until others follow. But what you've just described is something that can be done on a single platform, provided filmmakers and distributors and sales agents are willing to rethink the way people get compensated. It's not a quixotic idea you just proffered. It's really basically simple, provided someone builds out a platform that can do all of those things, and it's about as difficult as dialing a telephone.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think also the best news for me is that talking to tech companies and watching their moves is it's very clear that they now get that it's not easy to create good content, and that what ultimately is going to drive sticky audiences for them is going to be good content. And to do that, they need all of these traditional systems that they were so dismissive of as like, oh yeah, whatever, that old boring way of doing things. And also Hollywood, I think, in general, is alive to the fact that it needs to become more digitally savvy and more aware of, more actively involved in seeking out its audience rather than that passive stance that Ted was referring to, I think, or Glen was, we shall make it, you shall come, and you shall like it, kind of thing. But, really, I think there is a big shift that is ultimately going to be very meaningful, that the technology companies themselves do realize how much they need good content and how difficult it is to create that.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm particularly excited about actually has very little to do with the business and more to do with just the sort of the future of quality content and the diversity of it. I grew up in West Central Georgia. When I wanted to go see a movie, I either went to the movie theater or I went to Blockbuster. And for the most part, the movies that were in the theaters were the major studio releases. I remember Kids was in the theater in my hometown for one night until parents found out what was in Kids and theaters. And if I remember correctly, there wasn't a foreign section in the blockbusters that were nearby to my house. So if I wanted to see a foreign film, I was either watching it on HBO, because my parents got HBO, or I was driving to Atlanta to rent a movie and then driving back to return it, or going to the library. You know, there's an entire generation, and there will be generations growing up with access to everything, regardless of where they are in the world and regardless of what resources are available to them. And when you add to that the sort of production resources that are available to this same generation, whether it be their iPhones or their laptops or whatever it is, I'm personally very excited for the filmmakers that are going to emerge over the next 5 to 10 years, who are going to be in their early 20s with a film vocabulary and a knowledge of film that's as diverse as any of the people that I've been working with in the industry for the last 10 years. And I think we're going to see a lot of really exciting storytelling that is going to attract audiences that we can't even anticipate right now. That might just be the optimistic view, but I think it's highly unlikely we're not going to get a large number of very young, very talented, very film-educated filmmakers, and I'm very excited to see what they produce.
That's so inspiring. I think a great way to go out. Here's to that time when, you know, more diverse voices, more ambitious content, the ability to build those audiences, and the transformation that will bring us. I can't wait. I'm not willing to wait, actually. I want it now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Super interesting.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
So next week,